In the vast, endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean, history was written in fire and steel. Imagine the thunder of battleships, the roar of dive bombers, and the clash of titanic forces, all shaping the course of World War II. These were not just military engagements. They were defining moments that determined the fate of nations. Welcome to our countdown of the 5 most epic naval battles of World War II in the Pacific, a series of showdowns that forever altered the way wars were fought. Now, grab your seat, because you're about to discover how these 5 battles helped turn the tide of history. The Pacific theater of World War II was unlike any other battlefield in history, stretching across vast distances, from the shores of Japan to the islands of the South Pacific. The war in the Pacific was marked by large-scale naval and aerial combat that would change the face of modern warfare. Unlike the European theater, where battles were often fought on land, the Pacific was a naval war, with fleets of ships and squadrons of aircraft locked in decisive battles that would determine the fate of nations. The battles we're going to focus on today didn't just decide the fate of a few islands or military positions. They fundamentally altered the balance of power between the 2 most powerful naval forces in the world at the time, the United States and Japan. The Pacific War was defined by aircraft carriers, submarines, destroyers, and battleships, each vying for control of the oceans. The outcome of these battles would determine the success or failure of entire military campaigns and ultimately decide the fate of the war in the Pacific. In this video, we'll dive deep into the 5 naval showdowns that forever changed the course of World War II. These are the battles that broke the back of the Japanese Navy, shifted the balance of power, and ultimately led to the defeat of Japan. But before we get into the specifics of each battle, let's take a moment to consider the broader picture of the Pacific War and why these naval engagements were so critical. 1. Battle of the Coral Sea, May 1942. The Battle of the Coral Sea was a significant moment in the Pacific War. It was the first time in history that 2 fleets never directly engaged each other. Instead, the battle was fought entirely by aircraft. This marked the beginning of a new era in naval warfare, where air superiority would be just as crucial as controlling the sea. By 1942, Japan had rapidly expanded across the Pacific, seizing islands and establishing strongholds in places like Malaya, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies. Their goal was to create a defensive perimeter that would make it impossible for the Allies to launch counterattacks. But the Allies weren't going to sit idly by. They knew the key to stopping Japan's expansion lay in cutting off its access to the Pacific supply routes and preventing further territorial expansion. The Japanese were planning to invade Port Moresby, a strategic location in New Guinea. Control of this area would allow them to threaten Australia and sever vital supply lines. The Allies, however, had cracked the Japanese naval code and learned of the attack. This intelligence was crucial, giving them the element of surprise. The battle was fierce. U.S. Navy aircraft launched from aircraft carriers, engaging Japanese bombers and fighters. The Japanese managed to sink one American carrier, the USS Lexington, but the Allies managed to sink the Japanese carrier Shoho and severely damage 2 others, the Shokaku and Zuikaku. More importantly, the battle stopped the Japanese from invading Port Moresby, which marked the first significant strategic victory for the Allies in the Pacific. While the battle was technically a draw in terms of casualties, it had a major impact. The Japanese were forced to abandon their plans, and this was the first major sign that Japan's military could be stopped. This victory would provide the momentum for future Allied successes in the Pacific. 2. Battle of Midway, June 1942. If the Battle of the Coral Sea was a warning shot, the Battle of Midway was the game changer. This was the battle that would alter the trajectory of the Pacific War, and it's often considered one of the greatest naval victories in history. The Japanese had a well-laid plan to capture Midway Atoll, a small but strategically vital island located roughly halfway between Japan and Hawaii. By capturing Midway, Japan hoped to lure out and destroy what remained of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, thereby securing dominance over the Pacific Ocean. The Allies, however, were prepared. Thanks to their success in breaking Japanese codes, U.S. intelligence knew exactly where and when Japan would strike. What followed was an intense battle, fought almost entirely by aircraft. U.S. forces ambushed the Japanese fleet before they had a chance to launch a full-scale attack on Midway. The American bombers and torpedo planes attacked Japanese carriers in waves, ultimately sinking 4 of them, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. These losses crippled Japan's naval air power, and they were never able to recover from the loss of these carriers. The Battle of Midway was not only a tactical victory for the U.S., it was a strategic game-changer. It shifted the balance of naval power in the Pacific and gave the Allies the initiative. For Japan, it was a devastating blow that would impact their ability to fight offensively for the remainder of the war. Midway marked the end of Japan's undefeated streak and set the stage for future Allied victories. 3. Battle of Guadalcanal, August 1942 to February 1943. The Battle of Guadalcanal was a brutal 6-month-long campaign that would prove to be a decisive turning point in the Pacific War. It was the first major Allied offensive against Japanese forces, and its outcome would shape the direction of the war for the next several years. The battle began in August 1942 when American forces landed on Guadalcanal, part of the Solomon Islands chain. The Japanese had begun constructing an airfield on the island, which, if completed, would provide them with a valuable base to launch further attacks against the Allied position in the Pacific. The Allies couldn't let this happen, and they quickly launched Operation Watchtower, an effort to secure Guadalcanal and prevent the Japanese from using the island as a springboard for further expansion. What followed was one of the longest and most intense campaigns of the Pacific War. There were several major naval engagements, including the Battle of Savo Island and the naval clashes at the Solomon Islands. The Japanese Navy attempted to reinforce and resupply their forces on the island, but the U.S. Navy, using superior tactics, was able to intercept and destroy many of their supply ships and naval vessels. The battle was not only fought on the seas, it was a bloody and grueling ground campaign as well, with both sides suffering massive casualties. The Japanese fought fiercely to defend the island, but ultimately, the U.S. Navy and Marines were able to secure Guadalcanal by early 1943. The victory at Guadalcanal was critical because it marked the first major defeat for Japan in the Pacific and gave the Allies their first real foothold in the region. Guadalcanal was the beginning of the island-hopping strategy, where the Allies would gradually advance toward Japan, capturing key islands and bypassing others in a systematic campaign to weaken the Japanese defenses. 4. Battle of Leyte Gulf, October 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was the largest naval battle of World War II and one of the largest naval engagements in history. It was a key moment in the war that fundamentally altered the naval balance of power in the Pacific. By 1944, Japan was on the defensive. The Allies had already secured the Philippines and were poised to launch the final stages of their campaign to defeat Japan. The Japanese, desperate to halt the Allied advance, launched an all-out counterattack at Leyte Gulf, sending almost the entirety of their remaining naval forces to try and stop the invasion. The battle was fought over 4 days, and it was a complex series of engagements involving multiple fleets, air forces, and battleships. At the heart of the battle, the Japanese Navy tried to break through the Allied forces guarding the landing beaches, but the U.S. Navy's overwhelming numerical and technological advantage proved too much. The result of the battle was devastating for the Japanese. They lost several aircraft carriers, battleships, and destroyers, and their naval forces were effectively wiped out. The Japanese Navy would never again be able to challenge the Allied forces in the Pacific, and the result was a decisive turning point in the war. For the United States, Leyte Gulf secured control of the Philippines and allowed the Allies to press forward in their final assault on Japan. The loss of the Japanese Navy at Leyte Gulf was the beginning of the end for Japan. 5. Battle of Okinawa, April-June 1945. The Battle of Okinawa was the final major battle of World War II in the Pacific and one of the bloodiest. It was the last major obstacle to a full-scale invasion of Japan, and its outcome would play a critical role in determining the ultimate fate of the war. The battle began in April 1945, with the Allied forces launching an amphibious assault on Okinawa, a key island located just south of Japan. The Japanese had fortified the island with a large defensive force, and they fought with desperate resolve, using kamikaze attacks in an effort to repel the Allies. The U.S. Navy and Marine Corps faced tremendous casualties as they advanced toward the island's key positions. The Japanese defenders fought fiercely in a series of brutal ground battles, often using caves and underground bunkers to launch ambushes on American forces. The battle was a devastating victory for the United States. Although Okinawa was captured by the Allies in June 1945, the cost was staggering, with thousands of American casualties. For Japan, the loss of Okinawa was a critical blow that demonstrated the will of the Japanese people to resist invasion at all costs. The Battle of Okinawa had a profound effect on the final stages of the Pacific War. It convinced U.S. military planners that a full-scale invasion of Japan would result in even more devastating casualties. This realization ultimately led to the decision to use the atomic bomb to bring the war to a close. The 5 naval battles we've explored today, Coral Sea, Midway, Guadalcanal, Leyte Gulf, and Okinawa, were more than just battles on the sea. They were moments where history pivoted, where the tide of war turned, and where the future of nations was determined. These battles weren't simply about sinking ships or capturing islands. They were about strategic brilliance, courage under fire, and a relentless drive to win at all costs. Each battle brought new innovations, whether in strategy, technology, or warfare itself. They taught the world that victory in war is never guaranteed. It's forged in the heat of battle and the minds of those who lead. The ripple effect from these clashes didn't just affect the Pacific. It reshaped the global landscape, setting the stage for the post-war world. The sacrifices made during these battles were staggering, but they ultimately paved the way for victory in the Pacific. The Allied forces learned, adapted, and triumphed, changing the course of history forever. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the pivotal naval battles of World War II, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more stories that shaped our world.